And now we come to Shaun's entry, which is our one and only minim entry that is focused around section D. And it's really kind of fun. One thing that I would sort of mention here is, once again, please don't critique these entries on the basis of their sound set. So, as you could hear, that particular sound set is a little basic. And I would say to you, Shaun, that you should look into Note Performer because it's really a low-cost solution to a lot of these problems, like, the kind of fake-sounding celesta and harp that we just heard. Now, there is a bit of a problem in terms of the evaluation because the staff size is really small for these screens. I mean, I appreciate the fact that they are extended in a this landscape format. It's very helpful. But the notes are really far apart as well, so it sort of splits things into 4 screens, what might have fit onto 2 screens, right? So it's a little harder on me to apply some of the valuation criteria in a collective way. But let's sort of pick through this, and I will apply principles of texture, balance, and function to the different criteria as we go along. Part of this is made useful by the fact that we've got those fast broken octaves on the first page. So how well are they interpreted? One of the problems with that is that I'm not really sure what is intended here. We've got this sul ponticello measured tremolo here, or is it unmeasured tremolo intended? At this speed, agitato, dotted half note equals 60, the actual playing of this will, to all intents and purposes, be just a straight unmeasured tremolo. But the thing is that since we had broken octaves and 16th notes, it makes me unsure of what you exactly mean here. The players are going to have no problem interpreting this the way that you've written it. That's not the issue. The issue is just whether or not you had intended this to be broken 16th notes, right? Or measured 16th notes in tremolo, or measured 32nd notes. Do you see what I mean? Because when you add the 16th note tremolo beam to notes that already have the 8th note beam, you end up with 32nd note tremolos, which, once again, at this speed, are considered to be unmeasured tremolos. So if that was your intention, then you did it great. But if your intention was just to have each note going da 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 da, you know, if you know what I mean, then then you just added one too many tremolo beams, and you should have this as 8th note, as like a single tremolo beam plus the 8th note beam below it. All right. So it's kind of cool the way that you're adding like little bits and pieces of support here and there. I don't think you need to do this 2 against 3 kind of a thing. I think that it's easier on the player just to read dotted quarter notes, which is really what they are. You know what I mean? There's nothing really intrinsically 2 against 3 about this. I would just score these as dotted quarter notes, and just save the save any potential confusion. It's just kind of like a question of why, right? So right here, you're starting off with a big bang. You've got that low D in bassoon, contrabassoon, and then, of course, we've got French horn, or French horns 2 and 4, playing the octave above the bassoon. which is going to be the same note on trombone. It's kind of interesting that you go pow with these instruments, but you go extend with your lower heavy brass. And just a solid thump here on bass drum and timpani. It's kind of interesting the way that you balance this out. I would say just have everybody be more or less the same dynamic in the same sections and related sections, right? So just make everybody forte, and then you could have your bass drum at a softer dynamic if you felt that it was just a little just a little too much. But really, nobody is going to hear the harp right in here. The harp just cannot compete against what you have scored. Like that, just this solid thump. You may be looking at the sustain from the harp and thinking, oh well, the sustain will sort of emerge out of the after these notes have stopped playing, but then you still have to deal with the wash of reverb from the hall, which will, by the time it is through, kind of echoing through the hall, the harp will be finished, right? Especially at this speed. So it's really not adding anything. Here, I think you left out some tremolo beams, and this is another reason why I'm unsure whether or not you really intended unmeasured tremolo on each eighth note, or you had intended this to be a 16th note measured tremolo, right? In other words, each note doubled. Yeah, and once again, the dynamics are a little strange. Just the way that you're balancing some things. Like you have pizzicato, you've got the arco measured tremolo and so on, and then you've got pizzicato really softly. It's really going to be hard to hear. I think they should just all be the same dynamic. And then throwing this in pianissimo in the middle of a crescendo by the other instruments, I feel that the viola should be the same dynamic as the other instruments. Right, and then you're coming in here an octave higher with your violas, and you're bulking this up. All right, so one of the problems here is just simply that the piccolo is so much higher than everybody else in the wind section. You've got A2 flutes, and I see how you're trying to balance things by having them play mezzo forte, and everybody else is soft and so on. It's still not ideal. Especially since you're descending now into a louder passage. At this point, the flute will be completely inaudible. And it's 2 octaves away from the piccolo, right? Like, I think that you might have thought that this was going to be, maybe an octave apart, but it's actually 2 octaves apart, right? Because the piccolo is already an octave higher, and you've scored it an octave higher, so that's 2 octaves. So you have this kind of double octave with nothing in between. And when you do that, when you have a double octave with a missing, or you could say triple octave, when you have pitches that are 2 octaves apart with nothing in between, then you can really hear the harmonic overtones, for better or worse. Whatever it is that is sort of peculiar about that instrument is going to come forth and contribute in a sometimes not exactly the most beautiful way, right? So, my suggestion here would be to have the flute play an octave higher, then you don't have to worry about balancing it like this. And just leave the oboe down there and the piccolo the way that you scored it. But, even at all of that, like the effect that you've got here is that, even though you've introduced some elements, is that this is just really sudden, right? There's, you've got these upper notes, and you'd think that this is all going to bridge over to this nicely, and then it sort of then there's a sort of a feeling of a gradual build, but that's not exactly what is going to happen. What is going to happen here, I feel, is that these notes will be heard more as kind of like harmonic elements, and then just suddenly you've got this big push by everybody, right? The brass scoring right in here was kind of fun, though. I like that, bringing in that warmth and then pushing towards what is happening in the next bar. Yeah, and you could just really hear the need for a better sound set here with these harp glissandos. It just that kind of that rip from the more electronic sounding harp. Just really kind of tears apart your mock-up. Of course, you were probably scoring this without thinking about the mock-up. It really does look to me like you were not referring back to it because it's the mock-up is kind of counterintuitive to to how something like this would be orchestrated. I think if you're still kind of developing as an orchestrator and pulling some resources together and so on, the tendency is to orchestrate to the mock-up, right, which has completely different problems. So now we've got our slow hallucinatory build, and you are adjusting the tempo and so on, not exactly the way that I had it in my template, but I felt that some of the pushes were really kind of abrupt. Like some of the flexing of the tempo was just really pretty fast. But that's all right. That's just a matter of taste. Okay, so that was one of the concerns. Is like could that somewhat detached, sort of kind of feeling of being slightly out of control, could that be interpreted orchestrally? And there's also the continuing concern about the broken bass octaves. And once again, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, did you intend da 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 da, or did you intend da 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 da, like a real unmeasured tremolo? It'll all work fine, right? Yeah, I'm not so sure that Sul Ponticello is doing as much as you think it is here. The kind of a glassy sound. It's a cool, it's a cool kind of a texture to introduce, and there's some relationship between that and your muted trumpets right in here, that kind of glassier, more trebly sound. So, it's just a question of like how trebly do you want it to be, with the way that you've scored everything else, like having a lot of weight here from clarinets and English horn, and then the flutes on top in these octaves. Is that going to be too harsh of a sound? So yeah, we have that turbulent motion, and then this right in here. See, now here, now if this was intended to be unmeasured tremolo, then it should be a triple beam, right? And so essentially right here what you've got is a row of 16th notes, right? And so that also makes me confused about what the intentions were. Once again, none of this is unplayable. It's just, it's just scored in a way that when compared to its original material, makes me a little unsure about your intentions. And it's probably something that, like working with working with a conductor who had maybe commissioned you to do this, you would get these kinds of questions. Okay, right in here, celesta marked down from flute. That's not a good idea, okay? You're telling the celesta player that you want them softer than the flute player. And the thing is that celesta is one of the softest of instruments already, right? you could be marking them forte, and they would still be softer than the flute's mezzo forte. So don't tell them to pull their punches in a way that will make them invisible. All right, now here, this may last this long, but there is no way that a snare drum is going to last for this long on a single stroke. So once again, I feel that we have got tremolo beams missing. So yeah, so if you really wanted a nice snare or drum roll to last from here to there, then this all has to have triple beams on it. And that's another thing, even at piano, that is going to compete with your celesta. Right, and you have this big forte bass note right in here, and that is going to blow everybody else out of the water, right? So, like, look at all of the different dynamic markings that you've got here. Forte, mezzo forte, and also mezzo forte carrying over from your horns. You got the tail end of some forte scoring in your winds, and you've got piano right here to sforzando, which sforzando what? Right, we're going to assume that is sforzando to sforzando forte and mezzo piano in your celesta, right? So it's you cannot score orchestrally this way. It is better to have one, maybe two, maybe three dynamic levels going on, and if you get to your third level of dynamics, it should be because you got an instrument that is sort of softer than the other ones. Like, for instance, right in here, assuming everybody is marked forte, including your timpani, right? It's still mezzo forte right in here when it should be forte. So let's assume that this bar right in here was forte all the way through, and you really wanted this harp glissando to come through. Then you should mark this fortissimo, right? And you should actually have it up an octave, because where it is right now, it is playing over the same notes as the flute family, right? So it's better to kind of separate what the harp is doing to make its functions clearer. And this is going to be an incredibly reedy sounding stack that you've got here. You've got oboes in octaves. You've got, so clarinet, you've got your third clarinet right in here at an octave lower, and then you've got your bassoons under that, right? And so they are, and then, just then adding the trombones below. Yeah, it's just going to be very pungent, very reedy right in there. I mean, there are ways around that if you feel it's too, like if you score something like this for an orchestral work and you feel that that's just too harsh, there are ways of softening it. Maybe not having the clarinets in the middle, maybe having the oboe part being played by flute and so on. There are ways around that, that kind of self-reinforcing readiness. All right. Then we have got this big push to the massive tutti section right in here. And once again, harp cannot compete like this, right? It's almost like you're writing a piano part here, right? A piano part could definitely be heard. But forte in all of these parts, even mezzo forte, and crescendo, and also having brass below, your harp is going to disappear. This was one of the common errors, okay? And that is to not consider the balance of harp parts. Harp just really is a instrument intended for delicate kinds of scoring most of the time. And if you wanted to compete against a bigger orchestral picture, then you have to write in things like glissandos or big chordal rolls or patterns that are in a place where, in a harmonic, in a part of the register of the orchestra that isn't being used by other instruments, usually higher, right? Okay, so we've gotten to this point. Are the strings still sul ponticello, right? I would think that over the course, we're going to flip back a page again. You see sul ponticello again. Oh, and then here you say ordinario, but you don't tell your lower strings. Oh, I see, ordinario. Okay, I'm just not convinced by the sul ponticello. Okay, so you did take the time. Now here, unless you intend all of these notes to be down bows, you don't need to mark this as a down bow. That might have been something that if you wrote this on a DAW and then you imported it into like Dorico or Sibelius or something like that, you end up getting weird articulation marks sometimes. So yeah, so unless you're going to go down bow, down bow, down bow, down bow, then I don't think you need to mark the down bow on the first, right? Okay. I mean, see, I'm looking at this sound picture and I'm noticing how low your trumpets are scored. And I feel that they don't really contribute very much to your sound picture. I mean, I don't want people to get the wrong idea that just because I was telling people to not score high Cs that you should score really, really low. But I can see why you're holding off on them, because you want this to be brighter right in here. Like when you bring your trumpets in here, you want them to bring something new into the sound instead of just being the same thing. But then you leave out your horns as if they're not needed anymore, right? And I would think that you would want to continue on with fuller horn scoring and then make the trumpets be really, really intense. Now here you've scored a rip, right? I guess right here you had indicated stopped horns, but you have to have the plus sign over every note, right? So this should be, E flat with a plus sign, D with a plus sign, C sharp with a plus sign, and then you mark this here. Now I think you're intending a rip right in here. It's scored very unclearly. So yeah, I'm not sure how effective that is, but really a rip should, you're kind of going ring ring or something like that, or you're just kind of intending to show. It's still just unclear because I don't know if you want a quick rip up to E flat, or if you want like to hold on to the G and then rip up to E flat and then have enough of E flat to make it worthwhile that you marked it in the middle and then you ripped up to G. Because normally you would just rip up from G to G, right? You wouldn't have this thing in the middle. You would just have a half note here with the glissando mark going up to this G. Okay, so that's kind of how that would be done, and then the horn player would play over the harmonics. It's also confusing in here. Hang on. Oh, I see what's going on here. All right. Okay. So here's the problem. All right. Yeah, just the way that this is scored, is just really confusing. So you want to rip on this quarter note value up to this eighth, right? So this is beat 1, right? And that's beat 2. Wow. Okay. And then you've got this E flat sitting in the middle here. So this is something that would even, that would confuse a conductor and everything else at first. So it's just, yeah, I mean, I feel like this is the place where you would want to introduce some 1, 3, 2, 4 scoring, right? Just write your first and third parts on one staff, and then your second and fourth parts on the other staff if you're going to run into things like this, because it's just to use that Berkeley High School term again, it is hella confusing. Okay, so yeah, so like right in here you got these little excited riffs. You've got your harp going back and forth, and you don't need to do this, right? Just score this as a dotted half note, and then just have a nice long glissando down to your A flat right here. These are not very long glissandos, by the way. You're only covering the range of about 2.5 octaves over the course of, I mean, Yeah, so all right, so these are fast enough. This is not very fast, right? So the player is almost playing like a scale at this point. I would say make this low note right in here maybe an octave or even 2 octaves down, so that there is a chance for this to really kind of rip across and cover a lot of strings. Because the way it is now, it's practically a very fast scale at this point, and the harpist needs to move their fingers. I've seen situations like this where a harpist gets just not very much distance between 2 notes of a glissando, and they'll brush their fingers down maybe 2/3 of the way, and then they'll come in with their other hand and brush the rest of their fingers down to the low note, right? So just because that way they get enough motion going. All right, so yeah, we were going way over 10 minutes with this. Here you could be marking tenor clef with these high bassoon notes. It's just easier for them to read. And then you can jump back to bass clef right here. Yeah, and just a lot of weight on... I don't know if you really need... I mean, I guess like right here... I'm just was wondering whether or not you really needed to have a divisi part right in here. But I guess it makes sense right in here, right? But for the rest of this screen, you kind of don't need it. Yeah, big weight here. Absence of the horns is really going to be felt, and this is going to be really bare right in here. Like you have these. You have this textural approach, which is a bit hit and miss, right? You have these big dropouts. You'll have nice full textures in like winds or in certain brass elements, and then they'll just like be missing, right? And then there's like this huge gap right in here. So that spot is going to feel hollow, even though you've got fortissimo strings right in here. You got your really high violas, which I think is kind of fun. And you've got your heavy brass blasting away in here, but we're still going to feel this big gap right in here from the wind. So like in a successful tutti like this, there are certain elements that need to stay constant. Like right here, you've got all this weight in your lower brass, right? And then there's nothing, right? And so there's just a big, at your big, building up to the climax right here. And yeah, it just feels a little empty in the bass. Okay, last page. Wow, this one's going long. So yeah, there's a big punch, a big rip right here. That's kind of fun. Yeah, I mean, that'll all work. I like the fact that you don't push your trumpets too high right in there. And, nice bright horns. And, I mean, why was there no second violin here? And another thing is, why not have the double basses hit these C's really, really hard along with your bass trombone and tuba, and then have them play this it's written as a double stop, but you may know that you shouldn't really write double stops for double bass, because most people don't have fingers that are that wide, and also the bow is shorter for the length of strings, and there's it's just not it's not the most elegant, most realistic thing to score for your double bass players. I mean, there are some double stops that are pretty easy to do, and especially if one of them involves an open string, particularly octaves and fifths that involve an open string. But right in here, you got a C and an F sharp, both of which need to be fingered, right? And the same thing here. This B and this F sharp both need to be fingered. So it's better to write this as divisi consort, right? So div, div, period, consort, period. And I would say just have them start on the eighth note afterwards. And, there's no reason for the second violin to not contribute here. You've got your first violin hammering away at this F sharp, just bam, hits that hard, right? So what about this C, right? Does that C not get any love from doubling in the second violins? Maybe you just forgot to put that in here. Okay, all right. So here's the main issue. Like, this is actually really fun. I'm not gonna really critique this, except like just to mention, in the context of any comments that I might forget to say later about this, is that there are some places where the scoring is a little off, like in terms of what Falla scored in the piano part, right? So there's a lot of wrong notes, to put it another way, or there are a lot, there's some places where you change the harmony. I'm wondering if that was an error or if that was just a choice, but like here, it really does kind of come apart, right? So I can't give you any points for a convincing transition from this fragmented kind of scoring in the original piano score leading to the more lyric part of E, right? So you weren't thinking about that. That's fair enough. But yeah, so this addresses our last few concerns besides that transition, and that is, the fast broken intervals in the center range of the piano, the fragmented notation, and so on. And you're reserving the this right in here. See, look, once again, this is one of the reasons why I'm looking at this and thinking, did he mean measured tremolo or unmeasured tremolo? Does he mean 16th notes or like just vibrating, rolling 32nd notes? Because like flutes and piccolo can easily do double tonguing here. Right? That's really easy for the flute player, right? And usually, like, bassoons and clarinets will single tongue, so you're just scoring them as staccato. But they'd also possibly, also you possibly mean flutter tonguing. But if this were meant to be flutter tongued, then you should have a big slur over it, right? Because it would all be done in one breath. So it's just confusing the heck out of me, what you kind of intended there. All right, so here you have elected to write those rotating patterns out as celesta and harp, and these will be at an octave apart from one another. I would say that seeing as celesta is a piano keyboard instrument, you should score out the rotating patterns exactly the same way as they were in the piano part. Okay, and these instruments can be the same dynamic level. There's no need for the celesta to be softer than the harp, right? It can't outplay the harp. You should check out the Quartetto Simbolico by Villa-Lobos, which some people mispronounce Villa-Lobos. And that is a beautiful piece for flute, alto saxophone, harp, and celesta with wordless woman's voice chorus in the second and third movements. And very beautifully impressionistic, and that's an example of how harp and celesta work together. And you can really kind of hear that even though they have similar but very differentiated kinds of attacks, there's no question of one outplaying the other, right? So you don't have to be doing this kind of compensating. The celesta is not going to overwhelm the harp, and telling it to back off is a bit meaningless too, because celesta kind of has one dynamic, which is mezzo piano, right? I mean, they can sort of kind of play quieter, maybe, and sort of in the context and so on, but it doesn't really have very much of a dynamic range, right? So like, what is piano for the, what is pianissimo, triple pianissimo for the celesta is sort of like piano for the harp, right? And then what is, forte for the celesta is kind of like, or fortissimo for the celesta is kind of mezzo forte for the harp, right? So and for the orchestra, that's all sort of mezzo piano, right? It's kind of all within the mezzo piano range with some nuances and inflections. So the celesta really doesn't have this massive dynamic range. So fine tuning it is probably unnecessary. It's better to treat it as just kind of like a monolith that you have to deal with, that's kind of at a fixed dynamic, and then orchestrate around that with everybody else. In other words, the marking of the part is the context that the conductor uses to balance things. Okay, so yeah, unclear on this. Is this intended to be a roll? What is that? Same thing with the bass drum, right? No bass drum note is going to last that long, just from a single stroke. And then here you have clash cymbals. Yeah, so I think you could just, you can just write cymbal, and I think, like, unless you put any kind of marking that it isn't a pair of cymbals, it's going to be thought of as a pair of cymbals. Now here you've got the X note head that's completely unnecessary in concert scoring. Okay, so that's more of a more of a drum kit kind of a thing. So you've got your staff and you've got all the different instruments. So you really don't need to score X note heads in concert scoring. All right, so yeah, so I would say score this out the same way with the different voices and the different parts and so on, and similar for harp. Yeah, I mean, yeah, keep in mind, see right here, these are an octave apart because harp is scored at pitch and celesta sounds an octave higher than written, right? Now here you've got them 2 octaves apart. The celesta is going to sound an octave higher than this, and it is scored an octave higher. So you've got this, so once again, you should think about whether or not that creates any unpleasant overtones. Maybe it doesn't, but certain overtones become very, very pronounced in that kind of scoring. I don't know, but it just seems to me that that the cellos could be handling that top F sharp, and the same thing here. Just have the double basses hit the low C along with the winds and brass, and then come in softer, right? Rather, because the way that this is scored, everybody's fortissimo, right? And this is playing fortissimo, and that is going crash, and this is going boom boom, right? And how can you hear the celesta and the harp in here? Maybe these parts need to be soft. Maybe everybody needs to be really soft starting on that second 8th note, or that 8th rest. And do you remember, did you have a chance to see my my orchestration lessons, orchestrating Falla, where I threw in a cesura right in here? Maybe that's also what's needed, right? So there's just a bit of a breath before the next part starts. And there's a sense of continuity that could possibly cloud this nimble little harp and celesta scoring. Okay, wow, this is a very long evaluation for a minim entry, but it was really fun to do. So, a lot of times when a score needs a lot of work, it gives me a lot to talk about, and that's not a negative thing. There's a lot of stuff in here that's really fascinating, and bass clarinet, trumpet, and oboe, that is a very, very cool sound, right? It just I'm not really sure about what the transposition here. If this is intended to sound a major ninth below the written notes, and then you've got your B flat trumpet here on these notes right in here, and then the oboe, that is a very, very cool sound. Okay, well, I've said too much to quote the movie line, so I'm going to thank you very, very much for your score, Shaun, and just recommend, some basic recommendations. See if you can get a better sound set, And just to so the ideas that are being played back to you aren't so arbitrary in certain respects. And yeah, just fill things in a little bit more in some of the big scoring, and just watch out for the balance of very soft instruments that are just generally very soft. They cannot be, wishful thinking cannot make them louder than they really are, right? And then that weighs on you because you've given the player something to study and work on that is inaudible in practical terms, right? So watch out for those things. All right, but other than that, wow, this was really enjoyable. I really love digging into this, and it's good to have my first go of evaluating part of D. All right, so with that said, I will move on to the next evaluation. Follow me to the 7th minim entry, coming right up.